We hear a lot of perspectives on the Mankind podcast. Inclusion of a guest is not an endorsement of their views, and the opinions expressed here do not always represent the mission or values of the Mankind Project USA.
G'day and welcome to another live recording of the Mankind Podcast, the show where we break the molds of modern manhood and prove there's more than one way to be a man. I like to think we are simplifying manhood and masculinity for our listeners and myself. Boyson seems to think that we are complicating it at times, and that's okay too. I think that's part of the journey as we grab these things, pull them apart, take them apart, and nothing can get more complicated and entangled than conversations around sex, sexuality, especially for, drumroll, you know it, men. Sex, shame, men. There is certainly some entanglement there, and if anyone can shed more light, insight, and wisdom on that topic, it is our guest today, sex and relationship coach, Ean Wood. My friend, it is a pleasure to have you with us.
Oh, Brandon, so good to be here. It's such a treat and treasure because MKP has been such a huge part of my path. So to be on this episode, to be talking about sexuality, it feels like full circle.
Yeah. Well, and so here's a fun fact. Now, generally in the Mankind Project, men are of an older age, around the middle age mark. But however, you're a younger warrior, much like myself. There are those of us out there. Just keep a look at the Chattanooga community that's growing right now. We've got a lot of young dudes growing in this community. And both of us, interestingly, had our fathers go through the new warrior training adventure when we were kids. You were 13, I was 9, and how that's given us optics and advantages and benefits in our lives to be not only with fatherly role models that are conscious and doing their work and being held accountable, but meeting other men, other role models along the way. So just give us a quick little snapshot, man, of what it's been like growing up as a young person surrounded by this work.
You know, honestly, I think the biggest thing is just in my mind, it was programmed as normal. Men getting together, talking about deep things, talking about their emotions, talking about the things that society does, condemns or whatever. It's like, that was normal for me. That was my world. So my mind was programmed not knowing anything different. Men get together, they talk about things, they emote, they do challenging things like go sweat. And there's this community. They do come together and meet in that way. So just that programming, that normalization of it. And then obviously going to the NWTA myself, doing the trainings, it's just, when I look at my purpose, I say, okay, a greater power wants me to do this because it's been a part of my entire life.
That's beautiful, man. And the whole time I'm like snapping my fingers, like, yes, this is so much of of how I felt growing up. But despite the early exposure that we had to conscious men that held themselves accountable, created, great relationships with others, you and I both still went through the usual trappings and experiences of adolescence and young adulthood, namely around sex. And this is a topic we've certainly addressed on the Mankind Podcast. And it's certainly a topic that kind of makes me pucker up a little bit because I certainly feel like I come out of these conversations feeling like that white belt is way tighter than it was previously in and around this subject, which gets me excited that there's opportunities and areas to grow in this. But let's set the scene first and foremost. Why, on a Mankind Project weekend or in our men's circles, that I would judge the majority of men in those spaces. We've had 80,000 men in the past 40 years go through our weekend training adventure. We've got 750 plus men's circles worldwide, thousands of men actively involved. My experience is the majority of men in this work have had some form of, whether it's trauma, whether it is negative experiences, whether it is shame, whether it is insert a million different trappings in and around sex. Porn addiction, why is it such a large number? I want to get your take on that.
This is one of the reasons why I want to normalize this conversation, is because the hormones, whether we just look at testosterone or we look at sexual energy like as an energy that moves through the body and brain, however we look at it, it's extremely powerful. And it needs to be that way. How do we think that there's 8 billion people on the planet? It all comes from the same energy source, which is sexuality, procreation, a powerful drive to create more humans, to replicate. Without that, we wouldn't be here. Without that powerful drive to replicate, to have children, to continue the species, we wouldn't be here, especially in the way that we are. So it's like, that's what's crazy to me, is that something that is so normal and so important has become completely taboo, stuffed into all the closets, cupboards, attics, under the carpet, all the places you can hide something. That's where it's been stuffed. And even being in the men's work world, I've gone around, and tried different men's trainings, men's communities. Even in those spaces, it's hidden. It's just touched on at most in all the places I've been. And that's what really shined for me, is like, wow, even in these amazing, deep men's works communities, I personally believe, from my experience, we need to shine the light and go directly into it. So I think so many men have had these experiences because, one, it's incredibly powerful the way that it moves through our bodies and minds, and two, then there's nowhere to dive into it and to pull it apart, to tease it apart, to have the conversations of, what happened, why did it happen?
Yeah. Or why is it happening? Even though someone may not have experienced their own sexual abuse or harassment or whatever, it's why is it happening on a broad societal level? I mean, here's a couple of things that I've witnessed just in looking up this topic over the years. So Starlink, right? Satellite internet access, Elon's program. There was a tribal community that otherwise had never had access to internet. They got Starlink. There was a mass porn addiction in 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, basically the whole tribe was addicted to porn. Something I've witnessed myself. There are these, fantastic Instagram pages or channels that I follow that, inside history. It gives you really cool, little stats and things about things that have happened that may not be in textbooks or whatever. All of a sudden, at the top of my feed from this page, there's an OnlyFans girl shaking her ass in front of the camera, and it says, follow her for more naughty videos. And pages like that are using videos and taking advantage of the, the weakness or the lack of consciousness of guys as they're scrolling and drawing them in. So all of a sudden, their pages are exploding because they're leveraging this tactic. This isn't about history anymore. It's about seeing what this chick had for lunch all of a sudden as she's shaking it in front of a camera, which is also not great when my wife's sitting next to me and I open up Instagram and she's like, who are you following? And I'm like, I'm not following this girl. And I have to explain to her, like, what's up? So there are clearly people taking advantage of this, I don't know, is weakness? Is condition? What do we name this?
We talked about this, and I want to bring in like a playful kind of silliness curveball here, which is like remembering when we were teenagers and our bodies were changing. And that's something that I've learned the more I work with men and we talk about sexuality, is just the funny things that we did when this powerful energy was running through our bodies and we didn't have guidance or leadership. Like the funniest stories of what we were doing with that energy.
Dangerous, yeah. When you have the testosterone of a bull shark and you're like, oh yeah, who can climb the telephone pole the highest? Who can jump off the 80-foot cliff and instead of the 40? All right, you jumped it, I'm going to do a gainer off it. Like it's, yeah, there's definitely that kind of, that energy that engages that. Yeah, it's fun. It's adventurous. So I'm curious more about this playful spin.
Yeah. And so one of the terms that I've come in contact with in connection to sexuality that I think explains a lot about men and a lot of what I wanted to talk about today is where we start off and how that impacts our trajectory for the rest of our life. So we start off in this, the playful curve is like, there's a term called spontaneous erections. It's an actual clinical term. And that's like,
I'll give you the non-clinical term. It's the NRB, the no reason boner. That's what we used to get in high school. And if you forgot your belt to school, it was a problem.
See, this is where the funny thing is, like, as men, when we were young boys, we know that trick of tucking the boner in your belt or your pants. Like, yep. I remember being in class, nervous. Am I going to get called on and I have to go up there and I just might have a random erection?
And it's not this teacher. Not this teacher. I cannot get caught with an erection in front of this teacher, because the guys are going to slam me.
Now,
so yeah, I like
starting here and talking about this foundation because this is what starts us off. And it's this powerful hormone, this powerful chemistry, this powerful energy in our body with very little to no guidance. Very little to no guidance. And it's like, what do we do with that? Okay, well, a lot of us, we did things in secret. And we had locker room talk at best. And maybe we had experiences with other friends, men at best. And that is quite traumatic for a lot of men as well. Is like in that discovery process, in that hidden world, like think about masturbation as a teenager. For one, if you have any religious background, you're doing the devil's work. Like you are opening the gates of hell if you are touching yourself in any way, doing anything pleasurable like that. And even if you aren't connected to that religious world was around us sharing those messages and it was all taboo and secrecy. Don't talk about it. The parents don't talk about it. In school, you get some like kind of piss poor education. So it's all hidden. It's all this discovery, this wild energy is moving through us. And we're like, all right, what is this leading me to do? Oh, and then feeling bad about it in the process.
Well, and that can also, I believe, transpire into, if we talk about that dangerous behavior for that person that has been fully repressed sexually, can that show up in abuse? Can that show up in taking advantage and harassment and assault? Because it hasn't been aired out to go, here's what healthy expression of this sexuality looks like.
Totally. Without the avenue of healthy expression, it's something that I've come to see that the mind does is if I am programmed early on to believe there's something wrong with me, I am bad in some way. For some minds, that gets distorted and they just believe there is something wrong with them and they are bad. And it just goes more and more distorted in fulfilling that prophecy of self-belief.
Yeah, it goes into shame.
Yeah, and shame is that main ingredient that secrecy creates. Like secrecy is the place for that to grow. And not having conversations is the place for it to grow.
What's up, everyone? Brandon here, and I want to tell you, the busy professional, the dad that's juggling multiple tasks and duties, I want to tell you about something that has transformed my mornings, and it is Magic Mind. Now imagine having energy all day for work, dad duties, and perhaps some to spare in the evenings. A couple weeks ago, I was hitting that afternoon crash hard. The 2 p.m. blues were the soundtrack to my life, and then I got a hold of Magic Mind. Now, this is not just any supplement. It has been developed over 10 years by doctors and researchers with over 200 studies backing its ingredients. Now, this tiny little powerhouse of a shot uses premium nootropics and adaptogens, and thanks to the advanced nano-encapsulation, it absorbs 5 to 10 times faster than any other pill. Now, since adding Magic Mind to my routine, I'm more focused, calm, and that energy sustains all day without the caffeine crash. It's safe, scientifically validated, and it helps me and my wife stay sharp and stress-free. So if you are ready to upgrade your day, head to magicmind.com and use the code UNCHAINED20, that's UNCHAINED20, at checkout to get 20% off your subscription. Now you can find those links in the show notes, that's magicmind.com, and at checkout, use the code UNCHAINED20. When you support our sponsors, you support our show, so I appreciate you as always, and trust me, you will thank me once you get a hold of this stuff. So I've found, part of what I love, and it's also kind of coupled with the frustration with doing this work, is a lot of this work is often after the fact.
Yeah.
Right?
Totally.
After the addiction, after the divorce, after the abuse, after the jail time, whatever. And to hold that space for men in that place, like that's exactly what these spaces are for. So how do we look at prevention in a healthy way? And just rattling off some notes I have here from sex experts we've had come on. Like we had Dr. Lex James. She's a shame-free sex educator. That's her whole thing. Working in schools to teach responsible but shame-free sex education. And here's some of the notes that I took away. Certainly not, this doesn't encapsulate the whole conversation because it was a powerful conversation. It is not your school's responsibility,
right,
to teach. It's not your kid's school's responsibility to teach your kids sex education.
Right.
You need to start that early. That should be the most boring subject a kid ever goes to because they're like, duh, I have a vulva. Yeah. Duh, I know that, I may be too young, but I'm eventually going to get spontaneous erections or whatever. Like curb the learning curve in a sense early.
Right.
Certainly something we plan to do with our daughter. And that's also one of the best ways to have your kids themselves prevent themselves from being in situations where they could be taken advantage of.
Right. Right.
That was the big one that curious of your thoughts around that.
Well, yes, a huge part of why does men's work even exist? Like you said, it's after the fact because it was poor teachings, poor direction at the beginning. And now after the fact is, okay, what can we do with this? How can we redirect in a lot of ways? So it's, I always think that, if for men in particular, if they're a father, they have to go on this path themselves. They have to go on this path of going in, seeing what things were created for them, beliefs about self, poor relationship with sexuality, patterns, habits, whatever it is, doing that work themselves so that they can be that teacher to the generation below them, their kids or whatever. But I think, having those conversations and why can't this be normal? Why can't this be normal? I think the fact that it just hits me every time that there's over 8 billion people on the earth and we've all come here through the same thing, the same practice, the same relationship, the same dance. How can we not have conversations about that? So I do think that, yes, parents, fathers, particular on this show, it's an uncomfortable thing to step into. And that's where we got to get our warrior king energy and learn and try.
Yeah. So let's look at, so I'm sure at this point, many men listening can identify or at least know someone that may be experiencing some of these challenges, looking to do some work around this. Someone like myself, what are some tangible, practical next steps to look at kind of curbing some of these challenges and not in a way that's denying them or going around them, but facing it head on? What does that look like?
One of the things that I wanted to touch on, and I think it leads into the solution and the actions, is a lot of this leads to stress and anxiety, the secrecy, the hiding, the taboo-ness, the I'm bad, wherever that's coming from. A lot of that leads to stress and anxiety within the relationship to sexuality. And it perfectly correlates because in turn on, in activation, it's the same aspect of our nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system, that is the same for arousal, that is for stress. And so I think this is a good beacon to follow, to look at, to start our exploration, to see the word that comes up for me. What is the first step? Excavation. to, with curiosity, look at our behavior. Have curiosity with equanimity, meaning no judgment of right, wrong, good, bad. It's just like, let me take stock of my relationship to sexuality. How do I behave?
Mm-hmm.
What do I do? What are my practices when I pleasure myself? Do I hide? Do I have poor communication with my partner? Do I not talk to them about it?
Mm-hmm.
Do I feel shame? Do I feel fear? Do I feel stress? Where am I feeling stress? Where am I feeling anxiety? So this excavation, just the willingness to look, that's what I really saw in MKP that was so life-changing, was the willingness to look. What's going on here? This is shadow, is the things we hide, repress, deny, and don't look at. So, okay, what's the first step? Start to shine a light.
So there's I think a little anecdote I can share here, and it's not the first time I've shared this on the podcast, is when my wife was at the later stages of her pregnancy, she asked, previously she said she never had a problem with me using pornography. But when she was at the later stages of her pregnancy, she asked, hey, I'd like you to stop. And I said, yeah, fair enough, I can stop. And there were relapses. There were times where I would relapse, and we'd have to sit down and have a conversation and do some digging. And it was so interesting to then, upon that reflection, look back and go, okay, at that time I was 29. And I had been introduced to pornography at 14. So more than half my life, I had been regularly, and at 14, we had the internet, so there was no problem to access. So from the age of 14 onwards, more than basically half my life, I had been regularly using pornography. It wasn't multiple times a week or multiple times. Okay, well, in my teens, probably, let's be honest. But as an adult, it could be weeks without it. So I never identified an addiction, but I at least identified a habit, perhaps, that, okay, so what causes me to want to escape into pornography? Stress, overwhelm, having too much on my plate. It's a great way to shut off. Perhaps it's my ADHD, where I have a little bit of less dopamine response in activities and things. And so, it's finally a chance to feel a bit of dopamine in my day when otherwise I'm not getting it. That digging has been so powerful and so profound, that excavation, because it's allowed me to go, fantastic. With this awareness, when I feel this calling, man, I am 6 swipes on my phone away from being able to open something like this, to be able to go, all right, what's going on? What's the real story here? What's the situation, the environment, the circumstances that's causing this to happen? And looking at that first, so that I can then make an empowered choice to do different than what just feels very easy, a real low-hanging fruit.
That's, how cool that your wife asked for that. I think that's so beautiful that there was that clear communication, and then you got to go on your own journey. And this is why it's so important to have the conversations and bring it more to the forefront, is the way that we're designed as men, like chemistry, hormones, whatever we look at, that energy, we are in a world where we are susceptible. It's just, like you said, with this device, it's so easy to create that addiction, that soothing mechanism, because the chemistry from sexuality is so strong. It has such a visceral, like, dump into the body. So I think that's what, pointing at that is why we need to have these conversations, because excavation is as much without judgment as possible. It's just looking at, where am I on this map? Where am I? And it's easy to spiral out into, this is bad, I'm broken, this is wrong, da da da. And it's like, no, where are you? Where are you? Where do you want to be? Where are you? Where do you want to be? And that only starts by being willing to look at, where am I?
Yeah. And if I can wrap the story around it with the where am I, is through that, I guess, the vulnerable nature of that journey and kind of navigating whatever shame was coming up and whatever stickiness in breaking the agreement was, then I was able to, obviously not in the moment as we're having the conversation, and every time I owned up to my wife and told her about it, to go, yeah, and here's what's leading to that. Certainly not in the same conversation, but maybe a week or so later going, you know, I don't necessarily feel sexy to you. I don't feel attractive. And I don't. So here's my own experience, my own story. Like I work out every day. I'm cleaning up my eating. I'm looking in the mirror going, wow. But I'm not feeling that. Or maybe I'm not allowing myself to receive that from you. And through pornography, I can create some form of visualization that, oh, here's clearly an actor, an actress or whatever, who pretends to be really into it, but that kind of, oh, but that's the stimulation to be with someone who's really into it. And it's like, oh, that's my work then. That's my story. And then in owning that, and in the intimacy retreats that my wife and I have taken, it's like, okay, well, how can we create those experiences together consciously?
And this is the perfect example of gold in shadow, like finding gold in shadow behavior, like discovering the golden nuggets that lead to more connection, more intimacy by looking at what's playing out and looking at it through a deeper lens. Like, what's the deeper thing here? And this is why I'm so passionate about focusing on men and relationships and sexuality, because there's so much gold to discover that creates more intimacy, that creates more connection, whether it's with self or with another.
Let's talk about, oh, go ahead.
The next piece I was going to say is that I think, you know, after excavation, the next step is bringing awareness and consciousness into our pleasure, whether it's with self or with another person. It's like, okay, I'm taking stock of where I am. Now, what are some of the things that I want to bring in? What are some of the practices that I want to work with? Because, you know, my biggest obsession in working with sexuality is, in the world today, it's become this programming that is obsession with another body. That's what sexuality has become. Obsession with another body. Oh, I like this other person's body. And ultimately what we do is we give up our power and we give it to someone else's body on how attractive they are. And we obsess over them and all our attention goes to them. That is not us being connected to our powerful sexual energy, because we leave ourselves.
Interesting. I've never heard it explained that way. That when, yeah, okay. So it's not, wow. Okay.
We
so
end up,
can you dumb that down just a little bit more?
Yeah. So think about it. A man sees an attractive woman or man or whatever, someone they find attractive, and their mind goes, whether it's in fantasy or whatever it is, their turn on is now that other person's responsibility. They're the reason why they feel that way inside. Now, they feel that power inside of them, that is their power. But it has been over the years, movies, shows, magazines, Instagram, porn. It's like the other person now is the reason why I feel this powerful way. And part of this path with sexuality is reclamation of our sexual energy. And it's like, no, this is inside of me and I can build this whether I'm by myself or with another person. And this is something that I saw by actually being a part of the women's world, like the women's movement, is like I saw the way they talked about self-pleasure and the depths that they went into it. And I was like, oh, I need to do this as a man and reclaim my turn on is my activation. It's not, I'm not a victim and just these things randomly turn me on and that's the only time I'm turned on. It's like a reclamation of that power.
This is where the white belt cinches even tighter for me, because I'm like, dang. Like that's like that. Yeah. So in that moment, I go, man, my confidence just tanks, right? Because my only other model of like really, yeah, and I judge this to be owning sexuality. In reality, it's not. Is now comparing myself to these studs in pornography.
Totally.
Yeah.
And
but I don't look like them in more ways than one.
Totally.
So it's like, man, what does that look like for me to where I can really like own that and then have it to give or share, but it starts from source.
And this is the thing. This is why I love sexuality and working with sexuality as well, is like, it's fun. It's enjoyable to reclaim our power through the way that we relate with sexuality. And it's this dance of how we show up for ourselves and how we show up for another. It gets to be a dance, but an important step is how we relate with ourselves. And that's what I really focus on. And that's what my trainings, my practices are all focused on, is how do you relate with yourself? Think about it. This is what I love to ask a lot of men. How much energy do you put into, especially when you're just starting to date someone, or even if you've been with them for a while, you'll take them out to dinner, you'll buy some nice clothes, you'll like think of an evening, so much energy into, that attraction, that building that energy to come together.
The feathers are fluffed. Like the peacocking is
fluffed.
Fully fanned out. Oh yeah.
Now think about, and this is for every man listening, it's like, now think about the way you show up for yourself. It's like throw the dinner in the microwave compared to getting dressed up a night on the town. Yeah. It's like throw that in the microwave, zap it real quick, let's go.
Laying on the couch, knocking off the Dorito dust off my chest, you know.
So it's like, I think there's so much growth for men in creating that relationship with themselves and then bringing it to another, but really gaining that power with self.
This is, I think, ties on to that, very common quote or saying that, intimacy is not about the other person. It's into me see. Into me I see. And that intimacy has to start there. And that's where clearly the evidence is that that's where the healing occurs. And I found in previous relationships where I've had a partner who's experienced a lot of sexual trauma, when I've been able to hold that space and feel that confidence in myself, it was reflected back how healing that was for her. To go, like, I feel like you're not trying to give me anything or get anything. It's like you have what you need, and I can sit and find that space for myself. So it's like two full cups here. We got 2 full cups, and there's overflow. And there's far more that can be had and enjoyed and created and play with there than there being a deficit from any one side.
There's, when we think, I love that I love that saying of intimacy. And this is why working with sexuality is so important. Whether it's with ourselves, whether it's with another person, it's very intimate. We are experiencing something on a divine level. And that's why I'm so passionate about working with sexuality, is it takes us from the depths of shame. Like the potential that exists is the depths of shame. There's something wrong with me. I'm broken, whatever the stories are, the beliefs are, trauma, to this. The potential is to move all the way to integration and feeling that wholeness in self and showing up with another person just as whole as we've ever felt, as we've ever been, and we're meeting them where they are, and we can be this strong masculine container like you just talked about, holding space for whatever it is that comes up for them, and we get to do this beautiful, beautiful dance. And that is why I think this is such an important path, because I'm finding on my own life, I'm feeling so much more powerful, confident, whole as an individual and it allows me to show up completely different in relationship.
That's amazing, man.
Hey, it's Boys in here with the Mankind Podcast. We are closing in on 100 5-star reviews of this podcast, and we have a goal. Brandon and I want to get to 250 5-star reviews. So help us out, will you? Please go to the Mankind Podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and leave us a review. Thank you.
So I'm glad that you and I have made it clear this is not the only time. This is literally just the first time we're going to have you on the Mankind Podcast. There's so many other threads that we can yank and pull from here. Things like sexual transmutation. You know, you talk about the stuff you've done with Joe Dispenza around that. And then how, if any one of us has read Think and Grow Rich, even back then, Napoleon Hill was talking about this stuff, channeling this energy. And who would have thunk in that era someone would be willing to talk about this? But I think for many of us, including me, the first time I read it, it went right over my head. And so, yeah, man, this has just been a pleasure sharing this space with you and sharing your wisdom, your expertise. How can we find out more about you? Or if we want to work with you, what does that look like?
Yeah, right now, what I'm offering as far as this path is I'm doing a 28-day training. And it's with men in a group setting. It starts the first of every month. It's 28 days, so a month long. And it is this focus on excavation. Hey, let's look at where we're at. Where are we at on the map? I'm here. Oh yeah, okay. I have this relationship to porn. I have this relationship to sexuality. This is how I'm showing up for myself. This is how I'm showing up for another. Whatever it is. We go through that excavation and we start to bring in habits that not only help a man discover more about himself, but start to be like, oh, okay, this is like empowering. This is helping me move through some things that are showing up for me in this process. And we're doing it together, like having conversations about it. And in that, it's healing in itself just to have conversations of like, wow, this is what's showing up for me. This is what I'm experiencing. So that 28-day training is what I recommend most people to start with. Then I also do one-on-one work, like the deeper work. I have a modality I work with a modality that's called parts work or internal family systems. And I mix that with coaching. So that's like the deeper path. If, I know that some men, it's uncomfortable to have these conversations and be in a group setting. So I also like to make space for that one-on-one. And I'm pretty sure I can link both of those under this podcast, but those are the primary routes that I work with men. I also have an Instagram channel that's like my full passion right now. It's seeding masculinity, like the seeds, whether that's the seeds in your testicles or the seeds that we're sowing, like seeding masculinity. And I am very passionate about education and sharing, because this is my focus. This is my life. This is what I'm passionate about. This is my purpose. This is what I care about. So I'm just fully committed to having these conversations and just diving in deeper.
Beautiful, mate. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. Thank you for taking the time and sharing this wisdom. And these links are going to be in the show notes for all of you listening out there. I want to thank each of you for joining us live for this recording of the Mankind Podcast. This wouldn't happen if it wasn't for each of you and all of you. The thousands that tune in every week to learn from the guests and their expertise and the steps that they've walked in their lives. It makes my life better. I know
this has been another episode of the Mankind Podcast, produced in association with the
rating and
Mankind
review
Project
on
USA.
iTunes. That helps the show.
We
get out
have
to
been
more
your
people.
host, Boyson
And
Hodgson,
this
and
has
myself,
been
Brandon
the
Clift,
Mankind
and we want to
Podcast,
thank
the
our
show where
guests
we break
for
the
joining us
molds of
today
modern
and
men
imparting
with
their
truth.
wisdom
There's
from their
more than
experiences
one
in
way
this
to
amazing
be
journey
a
called
man.
life.
What do you say, Ian? You've done
If
that
you want to
today.
find out more about
Yeah,
today's guests
thank you,
and
Brandon.
support them in their mission, you can
Pleasure.
find
Lots of
links
love.
to
We
them
will
in
see
the
you
show
all
notes.
next week.
Now, if you have found gold and insights that you believe could benefit your loved ones and those you care about, be sure to share it with them. And of course, we are always grateful for a rating and review of the show on iTunes. Now, above all else, we've got to thank you, the listener, because through your attention and your support, you have made it possible for us to let men all over the world know that they are not alone and that there is more than one way to be a man. And if something in this episode has touched you, then perhaps it is the call to action to get involved in men's work. With live trainings happening constantly and in-person trainings happening all over the world, the Mankind Project definitely has something for you. Now, if you've enjoyed the music in this episode and all of our episodes, be sure to check out Jim Donovan and the Sun King Warriors. I have links to them in the show notes. And lastly, just know, what it means to me to be a man is completely different than what it means for you. That is the beauty of this journey. So if you are looking for guidance, support, and community as you begin to unpack and dive deeper into your men's work journey, then you know where to find us. Same place, same time, next week. Lots of love. We'll see you then.